Thank you for watching. I'm Madeline Blair, and this is Unlocked, a show all about opening possibilities, so that when you are hit with the unexpected, you've got some options. You know, I remember one day when someone asked a friend of mine, "Why haven't you gotten this job 10 years before?" I couldn't let it pass. I had to say to them, because that job didn't exist 10 years ago. Now, as I recall that moment, I'm reminded of the challenges facing our young people and all those who suddenly find themselves needing to pivot or their existing job disappears. How can one plan for a job market that evolves in rapid succession from one thing to another? Hey, ChatGPT is just the latest intrusion. We'll be exploring how one prepares for this, and then I'll be extending the conversation in Grounds for Thought, so stay tuned. Today, I'm excited to welcome two friends and colleagues who have worked in this arena and have real answers. Dr. Carla Flippo is president of Knowledge and Innovation Sciences Consulting and Coaching, former academic coordinator at Walden University, and general knowledge manager at General Motors. Dr. Sandy Kohlberg is an organizational strategist with Stratagems. She was a professor, program director, and faculty coordinator at Walden University. And together, they are the authors of the recently published book, Love to Learn, Building Your Mindset and Skills for the Future. Let me get these guys on the screen. I'm so excited. Sandy and Carla, welcome to Unlocked.
Hi, Madeline. How are you?
Oh, I am just fine now. Now that we're on this together. Listen, I can't tell you how happy I am to have this conversation, because I know you have used both your years of experience and your research to bring real answers to the questions about how to keep yourself prepared. So from everything I've already known about the two of you, I know that both of you are in constant learning mode. What was it that sparked your keen interest in learning?
Go, Sandy.
Well, I think it goes way back for both of us. Neither one of us were really very excited about school, the academic process. I have to really congratulate Carla, because she stayed with it in a lot different way than I did. I didn't have so many choices, so I kind of got into education by default, but learning is so much different. And, you know, I think the thing that really sparked it for me was the fact that I just have this insatiable curiosity. And when Carla and I managed to end up in the same place at the same time, that curiosity for both of us just kind of sparked a different way of looking at the world. Wouldn't you say that's true, Carla?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, you know, learning is a funny thing. It is not something that you do selectively. It's something that you do all the time, and you don't really realize that you are. And so when I look at, you know, at the educational process, and I have to say that the PhD process was very different. I really did a lot of independent learning through that process. It was more suited for an individual who didn't want to be told what to think or do, and you had to figure it out yourself, you know, and that is, you know, kind of how I've embraced learning, and that's kind of like what we did. So many cool things in the program, and it was not because we were doing the traditional learning model. We were really looking for those innovations in how to help people to learn better.
Now, you said you were both in the same program, and I know that because I was with you at one point.
Yes, you were.
Tell the, and I loved it. Oh my goodness. I loved mentoring those PhD students more than anything else I think I've ever done. What was the program? Tell the audience if the program is.
Well, the program was at Walden University, there are different schools, and we were part of the School of Management and Technology. And we had the PhD program in management and technology. And it had been, well, actually, it was one of the first programs before the professional doctorates came in. And it was old when we got there. It was tired and needed revamping. The neat thing about it is Carla had come recently through the program, and so she had a real good perspective of it. And I had done quite a bit of work in another program that was more current and refreshed. And so we had fun when we were able to revamp that whole PhD in management program.
Great. Well, you got to employ some of your insatiable curiosity,
I guess.
So what is it about today's work environment, the work situations that makes it so important to not just prepare yourself to enter it, but to keep doing it?
Carla, you picked that one up.
Well, actually, I'm gonna kind of talk about a little bit about what we experienced, because we had to do all the hiring as well for the program. And one of the things that we were experiencing in dealing with human resources and also then doing all the interviews for everybody was that people were coming in, they were very, very intelligent, they had wonderful resumes. I mean, you would think that they would be perfect for the position. But then when you really drill down a little bit deeper, one of the common things was that they were not technologically capable of managing in an online environment the way that you need them to be. So even just, the basic skill sets were really hard to find. And then, they would say, oh, yes, I have program management background. And yet when you put them in that background, you hire them, you put them in that position, it was very difficult for them to really excel because they frankly didn't know how to use any of the software to do what they needed to do.
Well, then on the back side of that was the fact that our HR department wasn't set up properly to help us hire. They had generic job descriptions and they wouldn't let us modify them very much. We had to hire advanced degrees. We couldn't hire for the staff position some of the things that we needed. And so we were in a pickle. And what happened is the hires that we made didn't function very well, and we had a turnover rate that wasn't very acceptable at the time. So that was a big aha for us. And one of the things that we realized was that people just didn't want to work the way we thought work ought to look like.
Oh, that's interesting. I would not have anticipated that you would have answered this question from the perspective of the hiring person, but how perfect. I mean, I can immediately see not just, okay, me with all my credentials coming, but you needing certain credentials that just weren't there. And yet, as you describe them, those, to me, it's like, hey, everybody does that, don't they? Wow.
Not really.
No, the ironic part was that, we had just finished a specialization in human resources. And when we look at what is around us in organizations, and even in our own, it was like none of the things that we were espousing to be capable human resource individuals, even at a PhD level, wasn't there. So it was like, wow, look at the gaps. There were so many gaps.
Well, and one of the biggest things was that a lot of the people looked at schooling or academics as a schooling process. And so what they wanted to do is have a pre-baked program that you could read the stuff, write something and regurgitate it and then move on. The thinking process was missing.
Yeah.
And man, that set up all kinds of light bulbs for us, because we found it not only in the people who were already with us, but the people that we were trying to hire, and also some of our students. And yet they were supposedly in a program that they were supposed to create new knowledge. And that was an exciting awareness, I got to tell you.
I was going to ask you about the difference that you've seen in students. Did you see any of that change over the years that you were working with Walden? Or, I mean, did it go up? Did it go down? Did it basically stay the same? That they really thought they were coming in for just a little bit more of what I would call high school kinds of training?
Well, I think it depended on who you got for your mentor. I have to say it that way, because if you got someone like Carla, or even myself when I was doing mentoring, or when I remember about you and you were doing the mentoring, that wasn't acceptable. We wanted people to actually figure it out and find something that was exciting. I kept pushing all of our students when I was in residency to go to what I call the adjacent edge. Don't stay with what everybody else has done, but go look at something that nobody else has done, and see what's new and exciting about it. And that found, from my point of view, some resistance until we got to the kind of people, I was lucky because I was able to kind of pick and choose who got whom, and I started making sure people who really wanted to learn got with people who really wanted to foster that learning. And that was one of the highlights of being the program director. What do you think, Carla?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I think that the mentoring really made a huge difference in the quality and just understanding. And even if they didn't come in necessarily with the research background, they certainly did learn that in that program.
Yeah. It was interesting when I worked at Columbia. I was in the graduate program, but not the PhD program. It was a master's program. And when I decided to leave, they asked me, well, what would have been the perfect role for you to play while you were here? And I said, to just be the mentor of the students. Because when you're in that role, you are not encumbered by, shall we say, a curriculum. You are, what you're really after is watching that student grow and watch their eyes light up as they discover new ways of doing things and new horizons. Because then they could take that learning forward. And that was me.
The underlying part of that, though, is they had to get through the process. And so much of the process was still old school. It was not exciting. It was very frustrating. And I think it really brought to the forefront for both Carla and I the need to revamp the way we're doing our educational system so that people can get excited about learning. And it isn't all about this step by step and get stuck and somebody can say no to you. And, it just kills that whole curiosity and learning process.
That's right. Well, I think you're giving me some hints as to why you wrote the book you wrote. Well, tell me a little bit about the motivation and how it crystallized in your minds and made it happen.
Go ahead, Carla, because you like this story.
Well, I think that we had been kind of all along kind of talking about it, and we kind of find ourselves at a place where, hey, let's write a book about all of this stuff. And I think that we need to talk about skills and how skills are developed. And I think that we need to redefine the skills too. And that was the other thing. A lot of times you'll see on a resume something like, oh, collaboration, oh yeah, I know what that is. Well, actually you don't, coming from knowledge management, my perspective of collaboration made it in there, right? It was how to facilitate, because if you don't know how to facilitate knowledge sharing, knowledge creation, knowledge transfer, all of those things in collaboration, that's what it's about. It's not just about working well together. So I was able to, contribute that from my background, and I really enjoyed that. And so we just went about talking about ideas and concepts of, what could we do? Is it learning? Is it schooling? Sandy?
Yeah, I think that stepping back, we kept looking at how frustrating how frustrated we became trying to help people move ahead, because what supposedly was supposed to happen out of this PhD program was people were supposed to be able to go out and get better jobs and more money.
Right.
And what they were finding is that may or may not happen, and it depended a lot on what the environment outside of the schools, the schooling system was. We also found that people were inherently unhappy with both the hiring environment. We were just out of the pandemic, and there was a lot of turmoil just in whether they went to work in a real place or whether they were able to stay online. And we reflected a lot on what that meant, both for taking a job and also hiring for somebody in that job. And like Carla said, we just kept finding that so much of what people thought about as far as jobs were concerned was different than what the real world out there had. And it had to do with the mindset, the current mindset and the environment that people were living in, and also their feelings about how to apply for a job and how to get noticed. And it was just all different. And we said, well, we know about that. We should start talking about it, and talking about it in a way that people can understand it. So we set up, I kind of went kicking and screaming because I thought about retirement. And Carla, the big thing that was so exciting is she was ready to go. And so we had lots of conversation about what that looked like and what stages that you were in and where you were coming from. She came from industry to academics, and I went from academics to industry and then back again. So we had so much that we could share. We just kind of went for it. And the result is our book, which we're very proud of, by the way.
And you should be for many reasons. I'm curious. I know, I can sense why you wrote this thing. What makes the book unique?
Well, one thing is where I'll step off from where I was before, is the generational difference that we have. We kept saying, well, when I went to school, it looked like this. Well, when I entered the workplace, it looked like this. And they were dovetailed in how we felt about it, but worlds apart in what was going on. And so one of the things that makes this book really different, and I think it's fun because people have come back to us and said this over and over again, is our whole area of perspectives. Every time when we finished a segment, we went back and said, well, this is Carla's perspective, this is Sandy's perspective, and it made it real. And the second piece of that was we didn't want to be academic in the whole thing, because even though we both have PhDs, we wanted it to be a book for anybody who was in transition. And so we talked about it intellectually, but not in an academic way so much.
And I applaud you on that, because sometimes we want to write for our peers, but the peers aren't the ones where you really are going to get give the benefits to society. It's the broader base. Yeah. Excellent.
So the other aspect of that, though, is the uniqueness is that and I had mentioned this too, is that we put a lot of knowledge management kind of subversively in there so that it wasn't in your face, oh, this is knowledge management, but it became a way of you need to manage your own knowledge. Organizations need to manage their knowledge. It isn't just about, it's not just about social media. It is about recording and having a place to start. And we're starting to see, at least I see, anytime that I deal with organizations that don't have a really good knowledge base, and you can tell that when they haven't been refreshed in quite a long while, or expert systems that need that constant, refresh. So from that perspective, a lot of the definitions incorporated knowledge management in that, and that I think is extremely important, and also making sure that skill sets were in alignment, truly in alignment with what the other businesses were really looking for. And the one, we had one chart in there that where we had all of the different types of software, and it starts off with, which no one talks about, which I'm kind of shocked about, is that when you have platform software or software that your organization has, like SharePoint or anything at all like that, you need to know what those packages are. That's like the first thing, and you need to know it well enough. I don't care if it's Google or whatever. Really work on being able to utilize the tools that are available to you. So we stress that also as that's very unique. It's very different perspective than what a lot of other books have.
I think a lot of books assume that.
Yeah.
Okay, but let's get serious. Your book is filled with advice. Talk about, let's say, 3 things. And maybe if time allows, we can do more. But what are 3 strategies that those pursuing a career should be considering to assure that they're ready for the, really as the future unfolds?
Right. I'd like to back up, Madeline, just a hair, because I think it's something that people have not recognized, and it needs to be brought up, is the fact that much of the soft skill development and the attributes that go into who we are as learners and who we are as people are taught way early, if they're taught at all. And so consequently, the soft skills and the how we get along with each other, those things are not easy to teach, and they're not easy to find, but they are so critical in what's going on. So I think we spent a good deal of time defining those skills: the critical thinking, the ability to handle conflict, the ability to be nice to one another. Those things are not skill sets that you can teach per se, but people need to recognize that those are critical to being hired and being successful in different situations, whether you're in an academic one, whether you're in an organizational one, or if you're in a community setting. Those soft skills are critical to being successful, and so we spent some time in that.
Well, I'm glad, because I think we figure that kindergarten is enough for learning that. And then we move on to the academics. Thank you for that shift back. I appreciate that.
But Carla, you've done quite a bit of real looking at how skill sets are developed, and I would really like your put on that for the part of the story.
Well, as far as what the future holds, right? I want to tell the story. So, and Madeline, stories, those are great things.
Absolutely, they are.
I had a student who finished the PhD program. She got her PhD, and she and I stayed in contact with one another. And she contacted me one day and she said, hey, I would like to, just at the community college level, I would like to teach. but I have no experience. I've been in automotive, so she's in automotive as well. And I'm like, well, okay, so here's the process we use. So we were right in the middle of writing and putting all the content together. And, and so I helped her step through the process of what I felt would be helpful to her while she was changing from being a quality engineer to perhaps going into teaching. And so we looked at different jobs. I think that one thing that out of all of this, just recently, as we've been working a little bit on our workbook, I'm only going to talk about it for a second, but it really helped to crystallize what it meant to analyze your job postings that you're looking at. And so if I were to say, you know, what one thing you need to do, you really need to pay attention to what they're asking for. Now, granted, those job postings are fairly generic, and it's like that pretty much across the board. However, if you don't understand what it is that they're asking, you're not going to be able to, even when you get in for an interview, be able to address that. So what I had her do was I had her look through all of the items that were on the list, and one of them was statistics, and she hadn't had a lot of statistics enough, you know, so that she could fulfill her requirements. And her employer had a huge array of classes all on stats. So I said, go and take those classes so that you have the backbone that they're requiring, and you'll have the certificates or whatever you need to have. So she started to do that. And I said, this, you are now responsible for the first time for your learning. And she looked at me and she said, you know what? You're right. And so the description became a way to find the weaknesses in her expertise, and she was able then to look for opportunities to learn. And then, you know, she says, well, I don't know how to write a curriculum. I said, well, funny thing, I happen to. And so we would talk about that, and I would get her onto Google, you know, the learning platform, because it's free. And I said, I want you to set up 1 week's worth of a curriculum, the assignments to read, you know, everything else, because it was in the courses were in alignment with her primary job of quality engineering. So if I were to say what one thing, that would be the one thing, is really pay attention to what they're asking you for, and you must do an assessment on whether or not you're capable or basic or expert at whatever it is that they're asking. That's the one thing.
Mm.
Well, the second thing that I think is really important is that learning is continuous. And once you've had that little bit of an aha that, oh, by the way, I might be responsible for my own learning and my own career here, and it's not going to be just a step here, step there, easy transition from one thing to another. It's actually documenting those skill sets that you have in a way that you can capture them again. Mm. And the resume is kind of old hat, especially with AI now reading them all ahead of time and choosing who gets to interview that way. And so one of the things that is, well, it's one of the highlights of our book is the fact that there's a way to capture your learning and being able to demonstrate it back. And we called it a professional portfolio, a professional learning portfolio. And the thing that we noticed when we were writing was that it was much more involved than we wanted to put in the book. So we talked about it in our book, and then we've expanded it into an actual the whole thing, the ability to look at yourself for what I am and where I want to go in my life, to being able to assess the things I know and the things I need to learn, to being able to create a portfolio. Those are the three real secrets right there. that we have put together in both our book and then expanded on in our companion workbook. So that portfolio and the process to get there is a real game changer for people who want to take charge of their learning and then their careers.
Interesting. I really appreciate the fact that you have not just said, well, this is your goal, this is your target, and then work toward that. Yes, you do set those, I'm sure. You talk about that. But then you get very practical. Carla, your comment, read the position description and really think it through how you meet up with what's there, even though it's generic, even though it's not really going to be exactly like that. But at the very least, when you go in to talk about your candidacy, you can say how you relate to each one of those and your strengths and relative strengths, or that you're learning, or whatever it is. That's really fabulous. And there's no question that learning is continuous. and I also like the phrase that you have created. Professional learning portfolio. As you said that, I thought to myself, oh my goodness, what would I put in my portfolio?
Well, it surely is a different exercise. It's a whole lot different than just listing the jobs that you've had and the things that you think you can do. And I think a resume has its place, but as part of that resume, if you can link to a specific set of skill sets that you can demonstrate that you've done something with, much like we link to our LinkedIn profiles, again, we wanted people to be able to be a step ahead of the mass of people who are out there trying to find jobs that they may or may not be qualified for.
Right. So the other aspect is, with the professional learning portfolio, the reason why the word learning is there is that we had a realization, and Sandy had mentioned that. She said, it's not just about putting, pieces of paper in there that of things that you've done before. Yes, you do that. But what you really are trying to do, if you're actually having to learn a skill fairly in short order, meaning not spending quarters and quarters at a university to learn a skill, there are many. I mean, the learning is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. And you just have to understand how to structure what it is you need to know. The position begins that. Secondly, there are so many resources out there. You need to know how to organize that into your own little curriculum, which we explain. And that is so valuable that what else the portfolio does is that it really breaks down very clearly only the things that are pertinent to the job that you're looking at. You're not attaching all, every sample, of every marketing study you've ever done, or if you're doing analytics, you wouldn't do everything. Be very, very focused on what is they're asking you. And don't put a bunch of extra things in there, because that's where AI is involved. Because AI is going to say, this person has all this stuff. And it used to be for us, we just put a resume, we throw everything together, or a CV, and everything. The kitchen sink was in there, right? Because you really want to make a good impression. However, our human beings looking at it first. So it's analytical. You have to think that way too. So it's absolutely, for everything they're asking, you need to have something to address that. And in a portfolio, that's really where those individuals can say, oh, this, look at, they addressed all of these things. And that's really, really important.
We didn't want to make this a book that was only for people who were already in professional situations or academic situations. This is really a book for anybody who is, from the time that they're in high school to trying to figure out who they want to be when they grow up, to people who are in transition and not necessarily degreed people. So many of people out there don't think they can apply for jobs because they don't have a degree to show that they've mastered the schooling process. Well, even employers today are not looking for the degrees to talk about whether you should be part of their organization or not. They want to know whether you can translate what they need from the things that you've done. So I'm particularly interested in being able to talk to people who, never thought they had the opportunity to get into some of the jobs that they probably would be really good in because they don't have so many letters after their name. So that's one of the reasons we wrote from the perspective that we did, so that people who wanted to go forward and didn't think they could had a different way of looking at it.
As you were talking, I was reminded of an interview I did one time of a plumber. Mm-hmm. Because you may recall that, what was it, maybe 12 years ago, I wrote a book called Riding the Current, which is all about how adults bring fresh knowledge into their lives. Mm-hmm. Nothing to do with portfolios, but just thinking about how do you refresh it. And it was one of the most interesting interviews that I had, because I couldn't figure out, how does a plumber keep themselves current? They have tens of thousands of products and pieces and parts that they have to know about. Mm-hmm. And I was really amazed. It's the vendors that teach them, that come in and talk about what they have to offer. And then it becomes the plumber's job to take what they're saying and deciding whether that's relevant and important to them and their work. It was absolutely fascinating.
And isn't that a critical thinking skill?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Let me tell you, your plumbers, your electricians, your carpenters, if they don't have critical thinking skills, they don't make it.
And their collaboration skills, their ability to work not only with clients but the companies that they're in, and then the vendors and partners. I mean, we just don't give enough credit for that skilled labor and all that they do to make our lives much more workable, I think.
Definitely. Workable is a good word. Well, okay, I'm curious now. You two have worked on this, and I know that you're both avid lifelong learners. If you could design a lifelong learning portfolio for yourselves, what would it look like?
Well, hang on. Let me go get mine. I'm only half kidding, because I do actually have a portfolio. It was a requirement, believe it or not, in a course I took in my MBA, which was kind of a funny thing, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, some of the realizations that just have come forward for us as we're working on the workbook, the companion to the book. If you want to go through the process, that's what that's about. But as we did it, we actually did an example from start to finish. Mm-hmm. And doing an example from start to finish helped really give us clarity on, well, okay, as hiring personnel, we were doing that. What would we like to see if we had a minimum of items in that professional learning portfolio? What would I like to see? And one of the things that the realization was, well, you can have a little synopsis. You can have the one thing that no one ever really thinks about, but a logic flow and a process flow. So it would be like a little decision tree. It would have a couple of decisions in there. It would have the process steps and things like that. And as we were doing this, it's like, oh my gosh, not only does that show my employer that I'm thinking and that I really understand how to do the data analytics that they're asking me to do, because, I've got it all diagrammed out. It didn't have to be big. It wasn't, right? And then there was a synopsis and then a couple of charts of what the output might look like, right? At that moment, that became a learning portfolio too, because now I got the job and I haven't used that skill in analytics in 6 months. And now I can go back to my portfolio that has that logic tree and remember what I said.
Mm.
It's huge. It also has the resources too.
Ah, good.
One of the things that you asked about was what our own portfolios would look like. And I'll go back to just before, probably 6 months before we left the university. A position came open that I would have really been good at. And quite frankly, after almost 10 years in doing what I was doing, I was bored. I wasn't bored working with Carla because we kept reinventing everything. And I think that was part of the interest that kept us going. But this position, I had both the business skills for and the academic skills and the people skills. So where there were 3 areas that I knew I was uniquely prepared to do. And so I put everything together and I was going to apply for it. And I thought, well, before I do this, let me run it by somebody a little bit ahead of me. And I had a real rude awakening because he was a dean, and he said, well, Sandy, you're trying to jump 2 positions, from a program director to a VP. And this is a position that is business oriented. And I said, I've got 30 years of business background. And he says, but nobody knows about it.
Yeah.
And that was such an awareness because I have degrees in social psychology. I have undergrads in psychology, behavioral psychology, and I've got all this experience in strategy and execution management, and nobody knew about it. And it would have taken me a little bit longer than I thought I had to put something together that I could actually demonstrate that I had those skills. It wouldn't have taken me long, but it wasn't something I had readily available to me. And there were 2 things, that, and the second thing was that nobody knew about it because the institutional framework didn't allow to share those kinds of experiences with other people.
Mm.
So that was a pretty big aha moment, even if I thought I was going to retire, which I don't think I did very well.
Okay. Well, this has been a remarkable conversation to get. I'm beginning to see what was happening in your heads as you developed this amazing book. There it is again. Love to learn. I love the title alone. Now, normally at this stage, I would thank my guest and go off and do grounds for thought. But today, I have invited both Sandy and Carla to join me in the discussion of grounds for thought. So stay tuned, and we're going to be talking about not just one book, but 3 that had an impact on us as we did our work. Every now and then, there is something that changes how I think about the world. Grounds for Thought is a place where I talk about these moments so that you can explore the meaning for yourself. Okay, Carla and Sandy, should we begin with Sandy's book and then shift to Carla? And I'll bring up the rear.
Well, I just stepped kind of into it a minute ago when I talked about, and I'm not sure this is going to be backwards or not. Where's go? There we go. The 4 Agreements is the book I chose, and as you can see, it's all marked up, and that's my working copy of it. I read that. It was published in 1997, and I read it at a time when my whole life was kind of going at cattywampus. There wasn't anything that was really solid in my life. And one of the things that we realized when we were writing our book was the fact that those attributes, those fundamental foundational beliefs of who we are and how we operate in the world are really not being taught in schools anymore. We put tablets and iPhones in in little kids' hands. I went to dinner not too long ago, and this family sat down kind of cattywampus from us, and they set up the little chair for the young person, maybe about 4, and set up an iPad. And that little kid sat there and flipped through games and things all the way through dinner while they had adult conversations. Well, that wasn't part of my life. My life was that you sat and you had an adult conversation with the adults when you were there. And it brought to mind how much we have turned over the responsibility of creating our own code of conduct to other people, both in schools and other institutions, when those things were really, we need to look at them as being part of our foundational pieces. So I saw the 4 agreements as a way of putting a foundation under us in kind of an important way, because those 4 agreements are being impeccable with your word. That means saying what I mean and meaning what I say, and being authentic in my way of being. And then not taking anything personally. One of the things people do all the time is carry everybody else on their shoulders, thinking they're responsible to carry them forward when it really isn't their job. Their job is not, it's not about me. It's about being able to understand and be a part of other people's lives and from my authentic self. And then not making any assumptions. Holy cow. All we do is make assumptions and judgments about everybody around us. What would happen if we didn't do that? And we stayed curious and understood and accepted people from their own points of view and started there rather than, with all our built-in assumptions and biases. And then finally, just doing my best work. If I can get out there every day and make a difference in someone's life and do it in a way that is honest and forthcoming, I will build community and people around me that I would never have around me if I stuck in my little box and didn't think about it in any other way. So for me, that the 4 agreements was a way to start to talk to people about the foundations both of learning and experiences. And it has followed me through in all kinds of ways.
Who's the author?
Oh, Don Miguel Ruiz. And I was fortunate enough to be able to attend a workshop of his after quite a while after he'd written the book. And it's the thing that I think is so interesting about the agreements. They really are commitments about how we live our lives.
Yes.
And
Sandy, I'm going to cut you off because we only have so much time.
That's 3 minutes. Sorry.
That's okay. Okay. Carla, your book.
Okay. So my book that I chose really was called Think with Toys, and it's by Michael Machelko, I think it is. That's how it's pronounced. And it really is the book that will challenge you on long-held beliefs. And you wouldn't think so, but it was written, I think, in 2020. And it really has, it's really intended to enrich collaborations with individuals and help them break out and mitigate confirmation bias in a lot of the things that we do. I think that it's a very impactful book. It has several different sections in there, and it even talks about improving your intuitive creativity in the book. And there's all sorts of exercises, and I mean, it is loaded from the very first page to the very last. There are so many methods that you can use in order to facilitate creativity, openness. But I think really the biggest thing is that it does force you in a way, if you're interested in challenging your beliefs, because it helps you to stand back and break down those assumptions. It helps you to do that. So it's very important, I think, that we need to be able to embrace that imaginative process. And I use it every day, and we've used some of these methods before when we're trying to figure out things that we might not have an answer for. So it's very helpful in that way.
Oh, thank you, Carla. It's interesting. The first book, Sandy, was really about our socialization. How do you operate in the world effectively? And and I love yours, Carla, because it's all about how do you spark up your creative thinking, uh, which is so critical for today. Well, my book is called Learning as a Way of Being. Oh, let me get it on the screen. Learning as a Way of Being. There. Strategies for Survival in a World of Permanent Whitewater by Peter Vail, Vaill. Well, I think to describe this book, I have to tell you a story because about 25 years ago, I had the opportunity to go whitewater rafting for the first time. I shall never forget that experience because you rode in a large inflatable raft, and as you boarded, you were instructed very carefully. You will put your feet here, you will wedge them under the tube, you will hold your arms thusly, you will keep alert. I mean, they were clear. This was dangerous, and you had to do what they said. And by the way, the trip itself was in New Mexico at the headwaters of the Rio Grande.
Oh,
And the whitewater, it was not the worst that you can encounter, but it was enough that they had to make sure we were safe. Well, now I remember absolute joy as we began the journey because I was seeing parts of the canyon that you could see it no other way. Uh, and I was with some friends, and the captain talked to us about what was happening and warned us that we were going into a rougher section. And just about then, my foot released. My leg went in the air and my body tilted. And miraculously, I retained my balance and I was able to get my foot back into the right place. And it was scary and exhilarating all at the same time. Now, when this book, Learning as a Way of Being, was written at about the same time as I'm doing this trip, the author described our environment being one of constant flux and change, just like whitewater. And if Carla and Sandy said nothing else, you got the sense that there's a little whitewater around. So over the last 30 years, it's only accelerated. We're not in the headwaters of the Rio Grande. We're now in the Colorado River, which is much worse. And maybe even the one in West Virginia, which I think is called the New River. He said, learning is one of the most important ways of being because the pace, pressure, and complexity of permanent whitewater can leave us distracted, anxious, and breathless. But what from that book had enormous impact was a list of responses to the question that he posed to people. What characteristics of a learning experience would you want to have for a friend who is about to begin learning something new? And among the long list, I think, of 27 responses, I found 3 most curious ones. The instructors have genuine concern for learnings. Yeah, the teachers have to love learning. Everyone is stretched out of his or her normal comfort zone. And lastly, and most surprisingly, genuine love and concern are present. Good social support is present. That short list of 3 informed how I design my coaching, my workshops, and even this TV show. So for yourself, consider what characteristics of learning support your own learning. And can you select that for yourself? Learning is a Way of Being by Peter Vail. Okay, now I can say, Carla and Sandy, thank you so much. You've been just fabulous having you on today. Thank you.
It's been our pleasure.
Thank you in the audience for joining me today. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation as much as I have, and that you've learned something. I suspect you have. And if you'd like to explore what it means to build and nurture your resilience and confidence with me as a mentor, schedule a conversation with me by sending me an email to Madeline@MadelineBlair.com. I'm Madeline Blair, wishing you infinite possibilities as you unlock your learning.